Hey guys, welcome to Tuesday Talks.
Yeah, thanks for being back, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining on the stream, or if you're watching this before the Zoom call on Wednesday, thanks for taking time to check this out before you get on that call. We appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a resource for you guys to be able to do some Bible study, and remember that this is something that you can share with your friends and your
Yeah,
family. So send it out to other people so that they can also be joining in and kind of learning alongside of us. So we have a few announcements to go over before we get into our study today. I think we mentioned maybe last week a little bit the golf tournament.
yeah. I think we talked about the golf tournament last week.
Yeah, so golf tournament has been canceled for this year due to the coronavirus. We're also going to have to cancel. This is kind of like our big announcement.
Yeah, I know everybody's waiting to hear this one. I think it was kind of expected though, but
Yeah, so Creed Camp will be canceled for this summer. We won't be doing it in June. We are looking at doing a Creed themed event
Yeah.
locally, probably in July. So be looking forward for more information on that. We still want to be able to meet together.
Yeah.
We've talked about doing some, live streams with other churches, doing some competitions maybe against other churches, things like that. So we'll still have some fun and it'll be awesome, but Creed kind of has, as we've done it before, will not be happening in June.
Yeah, we're gonna be able to do something. So create a Creed type experience on a weekend.
Yep. Yeah. Another thing to announce for May 17th is kind of a tentative date for this, but we'll be having a parent meeting, like an online webinar, really. So me and Austin are going to get on and kind of walk through summer calendar. We've been doing some planning on that, so that'll be good. And we're going to roll that out. We'll talk through it for people that are transitioning into high school, people moving into middle school new, as well as like summer calendar is going to look very different this year than last few
That's
years.
the hard part is with kind of just everything being fluid right now, waiting for the governor and just government in general to make decisions on how we're able to move forward. But we definitely want to do everything we can, take advantage of the freedom they give us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of special ability right now to do things, so we're going to try to make the most of that as well. Graduates.
Yeah. So graduates, obviously, since we're not meeting in worship on Sunday mornings like we have in the past for Graduate Sunday, the graduation processional is probably going to look very different this year. But if you are a senior, you're a graduate, you want to participate, shoot me an email, shoot Amy an email, shoot me a message somehow. Let me know that you want to be a part of that. And as we get that plan, right now we have a plan kind of in development. So as we get those details and the logistics out and things, we can get in contact with you and we can make it happen. So we do have a plan for you to be recognized, to have a processional, though it's going to look different than it has in the past. So
Yeah, I think it's going to be really cool from everything I've heard. I'm excited about it. All right. Belize Family Impact Trip is going to be a little bit affected right now. Belize is not really accepting travel into the country. So we're still tentative on like whether we can do that trip or not.
Yeah.
But it won't be a family impact trip like it has been in the past. So
Yeah,
that's going to change a little
Yeah, I
bit.
spoke with Mr. John Crow about that today. It's going to be a medical trip now, but as far as what that's going to look like, who's able to go and things like that, there's still a little bit of details to hammer out there. So as soon as we get words on that, I know we had a couple students who planned on going on that, and so as soon as we get word, you're either going to hear from me or you're going to hear from John about that.
Yep. And then we do have a few birthdays this week. One is today, Mr. Justin Wilkerson.
Oh, yeah. Duh,
His
I knew
birthday,
that.
of
I
course.
took him a gift today. Yeah.
So happy birthday, Justin. And then Lillian Guerrero, she's one of our rising 7th graders.
Okay.
So it's her birthday as well. So she's been going to Trek
Happy birthday,
a
guys.
lot. Yeah. Well, we are on the 4th commandment.
Yep.
And this is the final commandment, as we've talked about, our relationship vertically with God. That's the first 4, and this is the last one that's really focusing in and kind of the pivot point to move into our relationship with others. So let's dive in.
So, 4th commandment: remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. What does that mean? What does the Sabbath and what's the Sabbath mean? What is the Sabbath?
Okay, so the Sabbath comes from a Hebrew word meaning 7th. Okay, and the idea goes back as we look in Exodus chapter 20. It talks about how for 6 days we can labor, we can work, do all of our work. Our families are, back in this time, livestock. And so God gives this commandment: you got 6 days to do your work. Yeah. But on the 7th day, this Sabbath or 7th day is set aside. It's to be different. And it's to be a holy day, which means it's set apart for a special purpose. And that is rest and kind of reflection. And it even refers back in the Exodus passage to God's creation of the world. That he works for 7 days to create the world. And then on the 7th day, he rests from that work. Yeah. It wasn't that, God was going to collapse. He was so exhausted.
It wasn't that he was tired, but it was a demonstration and a model of a rhythm that eventually he was going to gift to the Israelites, and like a demonstration model for us to follow, kind of.
And this is where we get our weeks. The week is this 7-day rhythm period of doing work, whether that's school, whether it's employment, whatever, and worship and rest. And this is vital to both this culture in the Old Testament as well as to our culture at large now.
Yeah, I found that interesting when I was looking into this a little bit, as far as like obviously I knew where the 7-day week came from because we see it in the scripture in Genesis. But looking at like other cultures who don't follow scripture, who don't follow the Bible, but just to see how the 7-day week has kind of been a foundation for humanity, that there have been several attempts throughout history to get away from the 7-day week because they wanted nothing to do with any scriptural references. They wanted no society that had any sort of reflection of scripture whatsoever. 2 specifically that I remember seeing. I think one was French. Some like atheistic French government and an atheistic, it might have been Chinese, but it might have been Japanese. Like they tried to get away from the 7-day week because they said there's really no other reason for it. Obviously, a year is a revolution around the sun. Right. Months are based off of the moon. So we have some sort of natural occurrence for like the way we measure time in other instances, but we get our 7-day week directly from scripture. And so they were trying to get away from that. And it almost led to societal collapse to where they went back to it because they couldn't get away from it. It's one of those things that God has given us, and it naturally makes sense, and it's a natural rhythm for our lives.
Yeah. So let's look a little bit into this Old Testament idea and then New Testament and kind of what we're supposed to do with this now. So this is something that the Israelites have come out of Egypt, and we see in Deuteronomy 5. This commandment, which is a positive commandment, the first 3 are do not.
Do not. Yep.
Do not. This is a positive commandment. It's remember the Sabbath day. So observing the Sabbath. And this was something that they're to be reminded. Moses writes in Deuteronomy 5 that remember that you have come out of this slavery in Egypt, and now you're free. Now you have freedom, and you don't have to work.
Yeah, and you got to think about that. Like, to where they weren't in slavery, an off day was probably a foreign concept to them. Like, they still work. And so when they're being pulled out of that, when God frees them and he gives them these 10 commandments, and then the 4th one is you have a day of rest. Like, that's a gift for them to where now, after spending hundreds of years in captivity, to where this day of rest was not something that was valued by them, or even really probably an option for them, definitely not valued by their oppressors, to where now God is saying, hey, like, you are taking one day to rest and to remember. And then God took it a step further and said, and for that day, I'm going to provide for you.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about that.
So he demonstrates that in that time right after, while they're in the wilderness, he sends manna from heaven. And for 6 days, there's this manna from heaven. And on that sixth day, he tells them, take twice as much in. Every other day, you're not to take twice as much in, but take twice as much in on this day, because on the seventh day, I'm not going to send it, and it won't go bad on the seventh. But that's not to be a day for working and things like that. It's a day of rest.
Yeah. So what we saw in Exodus was, he says, take that day and rest, and he says even your animals aren't supposed to work. Your male servant, your maid servant, they're not supposed to work. So the emphasis in Exodus that kind of reflects back to Genesis is really on rest. That's the emphasis. But then we see this reiterated in Deuteronomy 5. And in Deuteronomy 5, the emphasis kind of shifts to remembrance. So we see two main aspects of the Sabbath: rest and remembrance. And like you said, that remembrance is, hey, remember what God has done for you. Remember where you've been, remember where you're going, remember how he's provided. And on a weekly basis, they're being reminded of God's provision for them.
And this is a huge thing, because of the provision of God on the one hand, remembering the provision. So Jews throughout history have remembered the provision of God to those people. Even the Ark of the Covenant has this bowl of bread that's put into it to be a remembrance. But then there's also a protection also for the people, that they remember God protected us, with the fire, with the sea, with all of these different, with the cloud that protected us from the sun, like so many different things to protect the people. And this is something that if you're going to rest on the seventh day, that means you're not seeking your own provision, you're not putting up your own guards, you're trusting in God on that seventh day. So remembering the Sabbath also has a huge deal of faith involved in it, that I am deciding on this day to trust in God's provision and protection.
So that's really how we see it in the Old Testament, is how it was described, what the Jews were expected to do, and how they weren't supposed to work. Now we see how certain rabbis and the religious leaders kind of built around that. So kind of before we shift into the New Testament, about Jesus' teachings, tell us a little bit about how the principle of the Sabbath was kind of abused and taken advantage of for the law surrounding the Sabbath.
Yeah, so with any kind of laws, it seemed like there were people who wanted to take it to the nth degree, right?
Yeah.
And the rabbis are definitely in this. They become very legalistic. They teach this idea of keeping the Sabbath to the point where it becomes harmful.
Yeah.
Like that's something that they should question Jesus when he heals someone on the Sabbath and go, you did work.
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, I healed somebody. That is a good thing.
The thing of that was he just told the guy to take his hand out.
Right.
Like Jesus didn't even touch him.
Yeah. He didn't do anything per se, but they were so against one, Jesus, of course, but also this idea that anything would be done on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
They had laws about you can only walk this far on the Sabbath. You can't cook, because to cook means I have to create a fire, which is work.
Not only that, but on the cooking you have to create the fire, but you weren't allowed to then pour that water out, because if you pour out hot water, that's considered cleaning. So you couldn't do that. You could spit, but you could only spit on rocks, because if you spit on mud, that'd be like creating a furrow or some sort of substance that can be used to create bricks or for work, or like you're plowing. So you couldn't create mud, so you weren't allowed to spit in the dirt. And this is what you see, and you read all this and you think this is like, that's ridiculous. But over hundreds of years in what was called the Mishnah, we see these laws just kind of expanded on, and kind of where you see the law that God has given us, and then you just see kind of these bumpers and these barriers put around it to keep you from getting even close to violating the law. But in so doing, you lose the principle of the law, and you become so consumed with that adherence to the letter of the law of the Mishnah, to where the Mishnah was being elevated even to the level of God's word.
Yeah. And so Jesus' teaching, a lot of it is kind of correcting the common view of what the Sabbath was supposed to be. He's helping them to get back to what was the original intent. So one of the things is in Matthew 12, Jesus says, look, if a sheep falls in a ditch or a hole or something like that, you're going to go help your animal out of that situation. You're not going to go, they have to wait until tomorrow. It's a time-sensitive thing. So people understood inherently, like, there's something wrong about not doing anything on that day. It's this idea of remembering the Sabbath day, of setting it apart, like we said, reflecting, remembering, resting, trusting in God, that the people have really gotten away from, and it had become that legalistic, just don't do anything that could maybe become work.
Exactly, yeah. It's taking that day, kind of redeeming that one day to take it back from your daily work, what is kind of like your daily labor, what you're supposed to do, what you have to do. You know what God's called you to do in work. Because you were made to work. You may not like it, but work is what humans like. That's not our purpose is work, but we are made to work. Like we were created. That's what we
God
do.
God gives that command to Adam before the fall.
Exactly.
So work is not a result of sin.
No, it's not. It's take the earth and subdue it. Like one of our inherent traits that God has commanded us, inherent command, is for that work. And as we are working, we don't. I don't want to say we earn the Sabbath, but when we are working hard within a week for our weekly rhythm, we're working hard. When we are able to take that day and set it aside for rest, it makes us cherish that day.
Yeah, you appreciate it.
You
when
appreciate
you have
that day when you can have it. It's like appreciating a vacation. Like your vacation might be your yearly Sabbath, where you're able to disconnect, get away, kind of hang out with the family, make memories, take pictures, do your thing. A lot of people have that one place they like to go back to every year, and you have those memories, and it's like an annual Sabbath, but this is a weekly Sabbath that the Lord has given us as a gift to kind of disengage from what keeps you busy and to find your rest in that day in the Old Testament. But when we shift to the New Testament, we're not told to find our rest in a specific day anymore.
Right. So we talked about this on the very first week as we introduced the 10 Commandments, that 9 of the 10 are reiterated directly in the New Testament. It's like, you should do these things. The Sabbath is not reiterated like that.
Yeah.
Jesus never says to stop doing the Sabbath either. But the way of the Sabbath is different. In Mark 2, he says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So, and this is beautiful because of like the timing in Genesis 2. Man gets made on the 6th day, and then the 7th day is the Sabbath. Like the next thing God does is set up this example for man to follow. And so the idea here is like, look, the Sabbath is meant for it to be a good thing, like you said, a gift for us, rather than this like wearisome burden for us to have to, I have to do the Sabbath. And that's what it had really become. And Jesus is like, stop treating it that way. This is a great gift for you to be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, just like that verse you just referenced of Matthew, or I'm sorry, what was it? Mark 2. The Sabbath was made for man. In that instance, what we see is the disciples are walking through a field. They're picking up heads of grain. They're rubbing them in their hands, removing the chaff from the kernel, and then they're eating it. They're going to do that on the Sabbath because, according to the Mishnah, that's harvesting. So that's work. They couldn't do that. And then Jesus reminds them of an instance in the Old Testament when David ate the bread that was sacred and set aside for the priests only. But Jesus' teaching in that was saying like certain things, like life-sustaining things, still have to happen. And what you have done as far as ascribing to the Mishnah and elevating the Mishnah is you've lost the purpose of what the Sabbath was supposed to be. And so even in Jesus' life, even though it's never reiterated in the Old Testament to have a Sabbath, what we see in Jesus' life is he never violates the Sabbath, but what we did see him do is violate the Mishnah. He violated the law that the rabbis were following in order to show them and to point out where they had gone wrong, and he teaches them what the Sabbath was actually meant for.
Right. So this idea of remembering the Sabbath still continues,
Yes.
but it doesn't look like what that first century Jewish culture was kind of holding it up as.
No.
As like you cannot, it's like one of those things you got to work at to not violate the Sabbath. Instead, it's a gift, and we still get to, participate in that as believers.
So in the Old Testament, the Sabbath, it was a very specific day. There was no question as to what the Sabbath was. There was no question as to really what you were not allowed and what you could do on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was an event. We move to the Old Testament, it shifts from an event. What does the Sabbath become in the New Testament?
So in the New Testament, we see this day of rest and reflection being aligned with a celebration of the Lord's resurrection. So, based on Scripture, Jesus dies on the cross, is buried, he's raised on the first day of the week, and this is, the seventh day of the week was the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Traditionally, what we would think of as Saturday. Now, the first day of the week is what Christians are going to celebrate the resurrection of Christ on. And so they adopt this day as the day for let's celebrate and worship just like the Jews always have, because the early Christians don't see themselves as a complete separation from the Jewish faith. They see it as the fulfillment of the Jewish faith.
Yeah, and that's what even Paul writes about in Colossians, that the Sabbath is a shadow of the substance. In order for a shadow to be cast, there has to be something of substance casting that shadow. And that shadow is being cast by the substance of Jesus. He is the fulfillment of what the Sabbath was meant to be. So in the Old Testament, as we're finding our rest in a single day, in the New Testament, Jesus shifts really what the meaning of the Sabbath is.
And so he goes from it being just a particular day that you abstain from work and that you rest and reflect. He's kind of drawing it into, this is a day that we set and ultimately will be a forever that we get to spend, of resting from like any trying to please God or anything along that rather we get to rest in the accomplished work of Christ, and that we get to spend forever in worship of God. And that's in our everyday life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's on our everyday life now. That idea of the Sabbath is no longer a specific event and no longer based on a day, but our idea of Sabbath now, or what the fulfillment of the Sabbath, is now found in a person. It's found in the person of Jesus. When Jesus wrote in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." We now, as Christians, in the New Testament, we find our rest, we find our fulfillment, we find our remembrance in Jesus. He is our ultimate rest. And it is in him who we remember daily, who we rest in daily, who we come to daily. And because we have that relationship with Jesus now, the idea or the original intent for the Sabbath, which was to be observed on a day, as Christians now, we get to observe and practice rest in Jesus every single day.
Now, this still, this idea is still not meaning that we just work all the time either.
No.
There's still this idea that we need to, like you said, society just shows to us that we need a regular rhythm of having a day set aside, a day of rest, a day of, to just kind of recoup and get back. And so we still do this, but this is not a religious set in stone, you have to do it on this day in this way.
Yeah, it's not a law now. It's not law, but we'll say like the principle of the Sabbath, of resting, is wisdom. Now in America we have a 2-day weekend.
Yep.
Like, we get 2 days off. There's kind of different reasons for that, but that's relatively new to civilization as a whole. A lot of places still don't get days off in general, but we have a 2-day weekend, and like I said, that's relatively new. But it doesn't mean that your weekends are just supposed to be spent being lazy, doing nothing, just like vegging out. I think a lot of times we have this idea that our Sabbath is just a veg out day, which, I mean, if you wanna sleep in on your Sabbath, go for it. Like, you wanna take a nap, go for it. You can find just as much rest, and like a nap can be an act of worship, just like your work is an act of worship. What is it in 1 Corinthians 10? So whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. So we work as an act of worship. We can also rest as an act of worship. Now, some people, they just rest all the time. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not just talking about being a lazy bum. There's difference between finding your rest and taking a break from that rhythm, and like intentionally setting aside this time to rest, to remember, to just like physically, emotionally, spiritually just kind of recover from the week. Like we talked about earlier, like earning that Sabbath. Like when you're working hard, you cherish it. When you're just being a lazy bum all the time, like, you don't need to be told to rest. You need to be told to go to work. Go get a job. Go work. Go do something so you cherish this Sabbath. Don't just be a lazy bum. You weren't created to be a lazy bum all the time.
I know that you do, a lot of fitness, and you're very involved in that. And as you do that, you can't just like work the muscle all the time. You've got to take breaks. You've got to be intentional in, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to take a break. And you've got to do that because your muscles have to recover.
You can't do the same. You can't do the same muscle group every day. I do think you can exercise every day. I don't think there has to be off days. I don't think you have to do like a 2-1. Like, different subject. I was gonna go down a rabbit trail there. Arnold didn't believe in off days though, but you can burn out. Now this is something that I haven't always practiced. I haven't always practiced a Sabbath, but one of the, I think the cool things that we've seen from this quarantine is I think we're gonna see a lot of people see like we needed rest, because workaholism is like a plague in America.
Very much
we
so.
Find so much identity and definition of who we are in our just hardcore, strong, grinded out American work ethic, which like there's some good to that, but there's anything in excess is bad. I think Pastor Bill said that this past Sunday actually. Anything in excess is bad, and if we're just grinding it out, just working hard, non-stop, not taking a rest, not recovering, not recuperating, we're going to suffer the consequences of that. It's going to affect our relationship with God. It's going to affect our relationship with our family. It can cost marriages. It can cost emotional health. And just like we see appliances now have kind of like natural checks to turn off, like space heaters. Like those things just used to cause fires all over the place now. But now if one tips over, it automatically shuts off.
Dead.
Yeah, well, humans have that too. If we are just running nonstop, you know what happens? Heart attack. Like, we have natural shutoffs where like we're going to feel the effects and the consequences of never stopping.
And I think on the flip side of that also, we have to be careful of just kind of living for the weekend, and that whole mentality of I only do the work so that I can get to the weekend and have fun. Work is a great thing, like we said. It is a gift. It is something we are tasked to do, and is a good thing for us to do. We find a lot of enjoyment in accomplishing things. But there has to also be rest. Recreation is great. All of these things together are good things, but when we kind of pursue one so much, we end up falling into a metaphorical ditch, and then we're stuck. So we've got to make sure we're staying in the middle of the road, not going too far to one side or the other. Otherwise, we end up getting into all kinds of different problems. And so remembering the Sabbath is this idea of not going into the ditch of just working all the time, forgetting how things are done, that God is the one that is providing and protecting, and not going in the other ditch of just like, oh, well, God will just provide and protect and I don't have to do anything. I can just be lazy and live it up. Neither of those is the right thing. It's in between those. It's I have a job to do, but I also rest in God's sovereignty and His ability.
Absolutely. It's being intentional about working hard and taking a break. And this, I think I started saying this earlier, but this isn't something that I have really ever been good at. This is something that like was hard for me, and I think this is hard for a lot of people. I'm right now just like really entering a new season of life. Pretty much my entire adult life, I have had a full-time job, a part-time job, and I've been in school. So for a few years, I had a full-time job, a part-time job, was also in the National Guard, and was in full-time school. And so there was never a time where it was like I can take a break, because there was always something that needed to be done. So there were, for 3 years, days where I was like, 3 years straight where it's like, there's not a day where I cannot do something. Like I have to produce, because in my mind, like I have to be productive, I have to achieve, I have to be constantly like just being a busybody doing something. And like it's not healthy, to where now I'm entering this completely new season of life, literally just this week, to where when I got to Cornerstone, I was no longer in the National Guard. I haven't been a personal trainer, so I haven't had a part-time job since I've been here. And I've been in school until this past weekend. So this is the first time in my life where I have like one like major like I have a job, and that's it. Like obviously I'm still a husband and a father, and I have that, but as far as like have to be productive and do these things and check these boxes, like this is like I'm 31 and I have no idea what to do with myself now. Like the other day I organized the storage shed, and I'm gonna build a pallet wall, and I'm gonna turn it into a patio, and I'm doing projects, and like it's like I gotta keep going. But then I find myself and I catch myself like, no, like rest is okay. And I think that's one thing that's going to be a product of this season that we're in, is that Amy and I were talking about this, like this intentional rest and this family time that we have been able to redeem right now. It's going to be time we're never going to get back, so we're trying to take full advantage of it. But in order to keep an element of that, what we have decided to do as a family is we're going to practice a family Sabbath. Like we are going to have a Sabbath where we as a family, we're going to put our phones down for the day. We're going to go to the beach. We're going to go on bike. Like we're going to do something, but it's going to be a day where I'm not working, where she's not working, where Easton's not going to be doing homework, where like just the monotony and kind of like the laborious things of life are going to be put aside so we can rest. So even though it's not a law that we have to abide by, there's wisdom in the principle of practicing a Sabbath, where now even Easton is like, is today the Sabbath day yet? Because like I think during this season he's worked harder than he's ever worked, because I want to be so intentional with him. Like you're not just gonna sit around and play on your Switch all day. Like you're helping me organize the shed. Go sweep the garage. You're doing something. After you do your homework, get outside. Like you're gonna be working. But to balance that, like we work hard through the day and like make him work hard. I wrote up 3 workouts for him. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he has to do like some exercise, some gym class type stuff. But what we do is after dinner, we play hard. Like we do jujitsu, we wrestle, we play PlayStation, and sometimes we'll be up way past his bedtime doing it, but we can do that right now. So don't get on me for that. But like we work hard, we play hard, and we're intentional about our rest.
Yeah. And I think we could dive in a little bit more maybe tomorrow in our Zoom calls about some of the other things that we do, especially as pastors, because I think Sunday is kind of a natural day for most people in America to be able to take that day of rest. But there's a lot of other things that, sports tournaments are increasingly moving towards Sundays. And as pastors, I mean, Sunday's like
it's
our
work day.
big work day. It's really the start of the work week for us.
It's when our week starts. Before I was in ministry, I worked at a prison. And when I was working there, my days off were Tuesday, Wednesday. So my work week was Thursday through Monday. So on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, like those were my rest days. At that time, I still had no idea what it meant to take a rest. Like I wasn't practicing rest. I was filling my time, occupying it with something else. But like you said, as pastors, with first responders, law enforcement, there's different people are in different rhythms to where that idea of the Sabbath doesn't always fit with what our idea of it might be.
So this is not going to be just necessarily a, pick a day of the week and that forever is going to be the Sabbath.
Yeah, it can shift.
It's something that I think people need to, the whole thing around this, I love what you were saying, work hard, play hard, be intentional about rest, is intentionality.
Yes.
Doing things on purpose. Working during the time to work, not being on your phone, not being distracted, not being lazy. Work when it's time to work. Have fun when it's time to have fun. And then rest when it's time to rest.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive into that a little bit more in our Zoom calls tomorrow. I hope you'll join us then, so that we can have some further discussion, see what you're doing in your own Sabbath, and maybe hear a little bit from us about what we like to do and are helpful for us in recharging.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about that. Like, as much as I like to work and I like to achieve, I love to rest and I love to play. Man. Like, I'm a napper. I will nap every day. So resting for a little bit isn't hard for me. Taking a whole day of rest, I think we can all learn something from Chick-fil-A because they're still doing it right.
That's right. All right. Well, that'll wrap it up for us for tonight. We'll see you on Zoom tomorrow.
Yep. All right. Don't forget, guys, 7 o'clock for middle school, 8 o'clock for high school tomorrow for the Zoom calls. We'll see you guys tomorrow.